All right, welcome everyone to the OLC Presenter Services webinar entitled The Basics of Preparing for Session Engagement for your presentations that will take place at OLC Accelerate this year. If you haven't already and you're just joining us, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat so that we can get to know each other a little bit. Just like your presentation will be recorded during the conference, this session is also being recorded for on-demand viewing. You'll be able to find the link on the Presenter Services webpage afterward. And I will throw that link in the chat and also follow up with an email. All right. So please feel free to ask questions. You can type in the chat and I will monitor the chat, or raise your hand to use the mic. We do ask that you keep your mic on mute if you're not actively speaking in order to minimize the background noise. Next slide, please, Tanya. Thank you. Now, I'd like to take a minute to just introduce our presenters presenters today. We have Tanya Means, who's the Presenter Services Co-Chair, and she's with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And we have Sherry Rostari, also the Co-Chair of Presenter Services for the conference from Coastal Carolina University. My name is Katie Fife-Schuster. I'm the Director of Conferences and Events for OLC, and I'll be here to answer your logistics questions. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Tanya and Sherry in order to help share some tips for preparing for your virtual presentations for the conference.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie, and good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I've been watching everybody as you've done your introductions in the chat. Thank you for sharing with us where you're located. I recognize a few of your names, so I've seen you either at the Accelerate or the Innovate conferences in the past. I'm so excited to have you back with us. If you're a new presenter, then welcome. We have some great tips to share with you. I'm going to kick us off today, and I'll also be handing it off to my colleague Tanya as we get just a little bit further into the session. To get us started, I wanted to first kind of walk you through some of our main course objectives that we're going to have for the webinar today. And again, as Katie's mentioned, feel free to take notes, and I also add items into the chat if you have questions, but we will make sure and allow time at the end of today's sessions to answer your questions as well. Okay, so our main goals for today, and I'll start us off, is we're going to go through the various session types. So you may have submitted for a very specific course format, such as a presentation format, that is a discovery session or other formats, and I'll be going over what those are and some tips for engagement. Our second item that we're going to go over as well for you today is we're going to talk about some items that you might consider when you're preparing to give a virtual presentation. I love these tips. They're great suggestions, and Tanya's going to be sharing some of those with us today. The third bullet we're going to go over today is thinking about the technology, and one of the core components that you probably had to submit when you submitted your proposal was how are you going to engage your audience? So we're going to talk a little bit about the interactivity component and some technology tools and techniques that you might consider for offering a virtual presentation in this particular format. One of my favorite elements, and this is actually going to be integrated throughout the slides as well as talked about towards the end, is humanizing, how we humanize, how we make sure people know that we're real people when we're presenting virtually, and how you engage and really shine through with your personality. And then finally, we're just going to give you and wrap up the session with some logistical considerations, and that's the time we'll also be taking questions and answers, okay? All right, so let's take a look at some thoughts to get us started with the idea of what is it that people really want when we're stepping into these virtual presentations. Regardless of the particular presentation format, what specific items might be important for you to think about as you're preparing for your presentation? And so some of the things that we have as prompts here, and I'm actually going to point to the third bullet first because to me that's my number one. We want you to plan. We want you to plan in advance because anything can happen. You could, if you're in a situation like we are at my school, you could be virtual one day, you could lose internet connectivity the next day, you could be face-to-face the next day. We've done the whole plethora this semester, like I know many of you probably have too. So you want to have all of your plans in place. You want to have backups for your plans in place where you can. If you plan to do a poll, then you want to have a backup of what are you going to do if for whatever reason your poll doesn't work. So I would say my number one recommendation after volunteering and presenting with OLC for a little over 10 years now is to always plan and have a backup plan in place. At the top of this slide is a great suggestion as well. Think about why you attend sessions and think about the sessions that you loved the most. The ones that I love the most are the ones that let me talk. So being able to express myself, whether it is, hey, everybody, introduce yourselves in the chat. And also, hey, tell me if this is your first time attending a session at OLC, or we're going to talk about VoiceThread today. If that's your tool that you're presenting on, for example, in the session, then ask them how many of you have used it and get them engaged from the very beginning. So we're going to talk about some of those pieces and some thoughtful ways that you can prompt them to have them communicating all the way throughout the session. Okay. Number two, this is definitely going to be dependent on the session type that your particular proposal was specifically accepted for. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. And then, as I've already mentioned, have a backup. But again, I'm emphasizing have a backup of your backup. I have backups for everything. And so go ahead and plan out the what if scenario. And then also a thoughtful little plug here too. If you'd like to practice, then as the co-chairs of presenter services, then we also offer coaching sessions. So you do have the ability to sign up to do a practice session with Tanya and I and the other presenter services coaches if you're interested. And we'll make sure and share a link about that towards the end as well. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of the additional items to think about depending on which session type that your specific session was accepted for. So I'm going to go through each of those just very briefly, give you a rundown of specifically what they are, and then some specific tips. As I'm doing this, I'm going to give you a prompt because I want to hear from you out of what we call education sessions. If you're here today and you're watching this presentation live and you have plans to present for what's called and what's classified as an education session, would you let us know in the chat? Would you just say mine's an education session? And it's fine if by chance you're presenting multiple sessions, like some of us are, then that's fine. Just say I have one that's an education session. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll watch those as we go along. So education sessions, if there was anything in the OLC world that could be classified as traditional, it would probably be education session. But again, after volunteering and presenting with OLC for over a decade, nothing OLC does is traditional. Everything is innovative, everything is creative. So even our format of education sessions, they do look a little bit more like a traditional presentation. You've got 30 to 35 minutes to do a stand-up type of presentation. But even throughout that, because it is OLC, we're still asking you to find cues and ways and manners to engage and interact with your learners throughout the time frame. Because of the way education sessions are built, you'll have 30 to 35 minutes to share your story, your research, your products, your plans, and then after that, we'll allow 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. And just like Katie is here with us today from OLC, you'll have somebody there to help facilitate throughout as well. So don't worry about having to manage everything and scroll up through hundreds of comments. We'll have somebody there to help facilitate and help you keep track of all the questions that may come in along the way. We have a lot of people doing education sessions. Congratulations. Education sessions are a great session type. It's definitely one where we have a lot of details, a lot of stories to share and data to share. This will give you a lot of opportunity to share all that information. On this format, as well as the other formats that I'm going to share with you, we have some tips. And as Katie mentioned, not only is this session going to be recorded, but you'll get a copy of these slides. So you will have copies of all these tips for you later on. Some of the best tips that we have for you if you're doing an education session is consider building in polling. And Tanya will talk about the importance of making sure you schedule all those in advance. I've already mentioned how important it is to engage your learners in the chat. If possible, hopefully you've already updated in the conference management system, you've already updated any information, and you can also add in there your Twitter hashtag. So if you haven't done that yet, you can go in and you can create a session-specific Twitter hashtag. So if you're presenting about OERs, for example, then you could hashtag it OER Accelerate or whatever you might want, and then cue your attendees and make sure that they are tweeting during your session to drive people to your session as well. We've definitely had a lot of success with collaborative notes. My personal favorite is using Google Docs and sharing a link to that and having everybody collaborate in real time and drop in ideas. But it's an easy way to have people participate and engage both with and without breakout rooms, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And then also audio and video Q&A, just a simple prompt, if you're comfortable. So part of this has got to be a question of, are you a first-time presenter? Are you a long-time presenter? What is your comfort level? If you're comfortable with having your participants grab the mic on audio and video, then feel free to actually solicit that as well. I think it took me about 3 years to be totally comfortable with that type of format. And so it's up to you. It's up to you and any co-presenters. So decide what works for you and go from there. All right, let's take a look at the next session type. These are somewhat new in OLC space, the idea of express workshops. So think about something where you're going to be promoting a hands-on technique, a hands-on tool. I used an example earlier of just VoiceThread just as an example because it's one that I know many of my colleagues like and we use here at my campus as well. So if you're teaching a specific technique, teaching a specific evaluation method or a tool, express workshops are probably what you submitted and or were accepted into. Again, you got 30 to 35 minutes slotted for engaging, hands-on, interactivity, and walkthrough. And think about what you would do in a traditional environment. You might have a set of goals and you might be pointing to individuals and saying, okay, this is step 1, this is step 2, and then you're going to curate and poke them and say, how's everybody doing? Does anybody need any guidance? This is one where you might find some interactivity and some options for breakout rooms potentially with figuring out ways to make sure everybody is moving along at the same place. So again, this one does have built-in Q&A, and notice that this one has a prompt specifically for group discussion. So it's important in particular in express workshops where you have one solid goal. Everybody is learning X. And we hope at the end of the Express workshop, everybody has learned X. And so with that in mind, it's not just simply a Q&A. We like to say, okay, everybody, we'd like your feedback. How far towards this learning objective have you come? What can we do to help you move forward, et cetera. So be thinking about not just asking a simple question where individuals might respond, but how to get them to group respond as well. This is a great place where collaborative Google Docs and collaborative documentation is also fantastic. All right, so the tips that you see there are going to look very similar. You also heard me add in here breakout rooms because depending on what you're teaching, you might find a space where that makes sense to add in breakout rooms, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Notice that one of the concepts that's added in here that looks different is a shared deliverable, and that's what I addressed earlier when I specifically said if you submitted and were accepted for Express Workshop, which isn't easy to get into, that if you did that, then you told us what your deliverables are going to be. So that is why people have come to this session for you. They are expecting to walk away with some kind of goodies. So we want to make sure that at the first part of the session and also at the end of the session, you say, this is what you're going to walk away with, and then you confirm, here's how you walk away with that. Okay, so make sure that you share with them, this is what we hope you learn and what you pick up. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. Gamified sessions, probably some of our more fun ones as well. 30 to 35 minutes for you to walk them through whatever you have come up with. Now, these are probably the more diverse ones out of all the sessions because gamified can be implemented in a really unique way. You probably came up with something very different than all of the others who were accepted as gamified. So I'm going to pause for a second, and I want you to put into the chat if you either are Express Workshop or if you're gamified, please identify yourself in the chat now. I'm going to watch those as they come along. So these are really unique sessions. You guys have very specific stories, products, research, outcomes to share. Same thing with gamified, but you are at the forefront of interactivity because they're operating in whatever game type scenario that you have come up with. I feel like this one is very, very, very led by your goals. It's probably more led by your goals than any of the others because you've created a game in a gaming scenario where you're going to be interacting. Again, same types of suggestions, deliverable, but notice the 2 items that are added in here, competitions and gaming. It's really up to you. It depends on how you've built your session, but we, Tanya, I, and the other coaches can help you come up with a lot of different items and ways to interact, games, goodies, things to give away as ideas, badges, etc., that you might have them earn as they go along in your session. All right, let's take a look at the next one. I love all these express workshops, your gamified ones, awesome. All right, so full workshops. So this is not the express workshop. Instead, as you'll notice, this one is actually double in time. It's a 120-minute block, definitely also built with a specific objective in mind. You're going to have the exact same items in which you have presented them with some idea of an outcome, and you want them to walk away with that outcome. The difference really between an express and a full workshop is you have more material to cover. You probably have more things for them to walk away with. It may even look to you like a part 1 and a part 2. I'm going to actually specifically recommend that you go ahead and plot it as a part 1 and a part 2. So notice that second bullet says format, 45 minutes with a break, 45 minutes. So even if it isn't OER 1 and OER 2, you might structure it in such a way that it's actually set up that way. That way they take a breather. Maybe they even think. You give them something as a prompt during that break, which is what I love. So while you're away, be thinking of things that we might do when we come back for part 2. You definitely want to hook them. You want to make sure that they come back for part 2. That's particularly important in a virtual session. So think about all the things that we've actually talked about here. Again, they're going to have 1 or more deliverables. You're going to be doing a group discussion about what we learned, what we're walking away with. You may do a group collaborative. And I definitely would say that in these types of workshops with the expanded format and a virtual format, breakouts are a fantastic approach for this particular group. I've seen them work very, very well across the board in many different scenarios with breakouts, but you need to practice with it in advance. And so it's definitely something where we like that as an option. You just need to make sure that you know which groups go where. All right, let's take a look next at pre-conference. Somebody here actually prepping for a pre-conference. So pre-conference, as you can see, are scheduled throughout the day on Friday, November 6th. If yours is a pre-conference, please drop. Good, thank you, Amanda. And Amanda, welcome. I recognize your name as well. And so thank you for letting us know. The pre-conference workshops are quite long, so 3 hours of presentation as well as interactive experiences. Individuals have signed up for these and will attend. Again, it's very hands-on. You're going to have a lot of the very same things that we've already talked about, but in terms of the way you're planning, yours is going to actually benefit from having a very, very strong structure. During the first 45 minutes, we're doing this. During the next 20 minutes, we're doing this. I think my number 1 recommendation is start with not only an agenda, but an agenda that has blocks of time. They're going to need to know that because this is such a large time commitment that they want to know what it looks like as they step forward throughout each of them. All right, and again, same types of methods of engagement that you're seeing here. I definitely think when you get to this format, it's 3 hours of their lives. So if you're comfortable with opening up video interactivity, I definitely encourage you to consider doing that in this specific session. I think you're going to get the best engagement and you're going to keep them there longer by allowing them to pop onto camera if they're comfortable with doing that. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the very next slide, lightning talks, which is a very interesting opportunity here. So this is a snippet. This is an idea. You have 15 minutes in order to present something that is a specific idea. I think that probably the biggest mistake people here do in lightning talks is trying to cover too much. So think of 1 or 2 learning objectives. Try to keep it as short as possible. Notice that the format is 1 to 2 minutes for introduction, 7 to 8 minutes for your main presentation, and 5 minutes for questions. If you could keep it to, if you have slides, keep it to 5 slides, then that's going to help you limit it. Okay, so 1 for introduction, 2 to 3 for the main presentation, and then 1 or 2 for questions and wrap up. I would definitely guide you to keep it at about maximum 5 slides, and that will help you stay on topic and on time. Again, multiple ways to promote, but keep them engaging and interacting all the way through. And though it's not actually listed here, one of the things I think that would be beneficial for those of you trying to prep for lightning talks, and if you are, let us know in the chat. If you're prepping for a lightning talk, you need to promote heavily on Twitter in advance and heavily through your social media channels. And if you can, go ahead and prep for what am I going to do after the session, because they're going to love your talk, but you only have 15 minutes, so they're going to want more. So go ahead and tell them, we only have 15 minutes, so after this, join us on, or after this, go to this Google Doc. So if that's you, if you're a lightning talk person, think about ways that you can engage them before via Twitter or after the conference via a collaborative document. They love that. They love to find ways to continue to share in these really tiny sessions. They're really short snippets. They always want more information. So go ahead and be prepared. They will follow up. So find a way to go ahead and get them ready to share information. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off now to my colleague Tanya. She's got some great tips for us to share, and I'm going to pop up and keep managing chat. Please continue to ask questions, and we'll be answering questions along the way and then also at the end. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Sherry. That was awesome. And I got more and more excited the more you were talking about the different session types. I wanted to do them all. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Good to see those of you who are on video, and definitely seeing those of you who are in chat and all the things you're sharing. Wanted to talk specifically about some of the things that you can do through your presentation to both humanize your presentation, as we'll talk in some specifics as well, how you engage your audience. So the most important thing that I can help you to recognize is that your presentation is not your technology. So what the technology that you're using is not the thing that is doing your presentation, but technology can do so many things to help set the environment for what you're going to be doing to make your presentation really engaging for your audience. And so we'll talk through some of those and help you to recognize some of the opportunities that you have for the different session types. So the first thing we wanted to cover was this idea of setting the stage, of helping to manage your environment. So some of the important things here will be to make sure that when you pick your location, that you've got a really good location for lighting, minimizing noise, making sure you have a good camera view. Those kinds of things are going to be very important, both for during the live presentation itself, and then for those who are watching the recording after the fact. You want to do as much as you can ahead of time to make sure that you are minimizing any disruptions that you might have. And so you can do things to prevent interruptions, turn off your email, turn off notifications, put your phone away, all those kinds of things. Encouraging people who are attending your presentation to keep their mics muted when they're not speaking, or to turn off their camera if they have a really busy environment behind them, or things like that. You also want to set up your screen ahead of time so that you've got kind of the area in which you're going to be operating, so that it's not really distracting for you as you're doing the presentation. You want to communicate clearly to your audience and make sure that they understand the expectations, and that they also know how they can participate and engage, because you don't want them to feel like they're just kind of watching from the sidelines. You really want them to feel like they're a part of your presentation and that they're engaged in your session. Now, even though you've done all of these plans, you still may have disruption or interruptions in your presentation. And so plan ahead for those and recognize, well, if my kid comes running in with some kind of an emergency while I'm in the middle of the presentation, what am I going to do about it? Certainly, it would not be best for you to make this awful mom face and scream at the kid to get out. On the other hand, you also don't want them to disrupt your presentation too much. So making sure that they know ahead of time, other people in your household know ahead of time that you're going to be in a session. And then if something happens, just go with it, because it's life. And we all recognize that it's life, and just let people know this is my life, and hopefully they have the same grace for you that you would have for other people. We're all humans, and we need to recognize that this is just how things go. So specifically talking about lighting, some of the things that you can do, and I'll show you some screenshots in just a moment, but basically you want to avoid any kind of a bright backdrop that's going to backlight you. So Sherry, you're gonna be able to look at Sherry's video and see that she has a bright backdrop, and she's done everything she can, but she has no other space. And so that can make it a little bit more difficult for your audience to be able to see your video and to be able to tell what you're doing as opposed to the lighting behind you. And so practicing ahead of time and setting up your lighting, even if you need to move your environment, move your workspace so that you have that appropriate lighting, you can do that ahead of time. The best thing you can do is to face a window with natural light, but if you don't have that option available to you, you can also get lamps or lighting to specifically light your face. Some of it could be as simple as a little pin light that's just appropriately placed, or there's a lot of different lighting options that you can set up. And then actually practice your lighting ahead of time. So set up your lights, sit down in front of your computer where you think you'll be presenting. If that doesn't quite work, move the lighting around and move your desk and do those kinds of things ahead of time so that you're not having to do that during the presentation. The best thing you can do is to make your lighting as even as possible so that you don't have streaks from the window lighting across your face or something blinding you or things like that. So here's an example of besides Sherry's example, a lighting example that has a window behind that is really just kind of washing out with the picture and making it difficult to see. On the other hand, if you turn the camera around so that you're facing the window, it's going to look a lot better because it's going to clearly light up your face and help you to show the best you can. Now, noise is often something that you don't necessarily consider because if you're in the environment and you hear the noise all the time, it doesn't really register to you. But if you're using a really good quality microphone, it may or may not pick up that sound. And so I would suggest that you do a practice recording and then play back that recording so that you can hear what kinds of ambient noises there are in the environment. Sometimes you can set the settings of the microphone so that they weed out that ambient noise, or you may need to turn off a fan or turn off a vent or move to a different area in order to be able to get that noise eliminated. Like I mentioned earlier, closing your door, even if you can lock the door or put a sign on the door, letting everyone in your environment know I'm going to be in a session that is going to be recorded and I'm not going to be able to be available right now. Those are really good. As far as a microphone, I have here a lavalier mic that is just a little clip-on mic. You can use that. If you do use that, make sure that it's placed appropriately so it's not rubbing against your clothes or your hair or anything like that while you're talking and picking up that ambient noise. Sherry has an example of a great headset that has headphones and a mic. You can use that. If you are going to use something that's connected Bluetooth, you want to make sure that it's going to stay connected and not drop out while you're in the middle of your presentation. So do a lot of that testing ahead of time to make sure that you're going to have good audio quality throughout the whole presentation. And check on your computer audio settings and make sure that if you do want to play a computer, like a video during your presentation, that you have Zoom, that you have the box checked to be able to capture the audio. We'll show a screenshot of that in just a little bit, or your computer sound, or things like that. Do all of those checks ahead of time to make sure that your audio is not going to cause a problem. Now, in thinking about how you set up your camera view, it's best if you are using this idea that's used in journalism of the rule of thirds. You basically want to center yourself as much as you can directly in front of your camera so that when you are in the view that your outline of yourself is kind of covering that middle section of the camera. If your camera is located off to the side or too high or too low, you can try to adjust it and get it so that you're pretty much straight on in front. You don't want to have the top of your forehead being cut off, but you also don't want to have a huge gap of space above your head in addition to that. And then if you can set your camera so that you're basically at eye level, whether you need to lift up your laptop or lift up your computer or stand or sit at a different height, that's going to be the best way for you to be able to make sure that you look like you're looking at your audience. Another trick that I've used for a really long time is that if you can take the view on your screen that is your camera playback, and you can put that as close as possible to the location of where your camera is, and then when you look at the video feed, you're also looking towards the camera. Another thing that some people do is they put a little sticker next to the camera, a little smiley face or something, just to get people to look at the camera as opposed to looking down or around or any of those kinds of things. And then having the camera about 2 to 3 feet away is usually a good rule of thumb for making sure that you are not too far away in the camera view or too close in the camera view. In terms of other preparation to do, I encourage you to write a script in conversational language, but recognize that you're not going to read the script. You do not want to have a script that is so rigid that you just have to read it, because you will definitely look like you're reading it, and you will sound, no matter how conversationally you write it, you will still sound very stilted because we don't read in the same tone of voice as we speak. So practice with that script as much as you can to be really familiar with and know what kinds of things are coming next, using a mirror or in front of a friend. but don't rely on the fact that you're going to, or thinking that you're going to read that script. Instead, the thing that you can do is kind of put some bullet points, either in the notes of your presentation, whether you're using Google Slides or presentation or Keynote, putting in that presenter notes, put things in bullet points, especially if you have a second monitor like I do, where my screen is actually over here that has my slide deck on it. If I put my presentation notes directly in front of me and I see the bullet points, then it helps me to remember the things that I wanted to say, but it doesn't make me want to read my slides. Anytime you can use facial expressions, that's really going to help, especially as people are watching you and playing off of the things that you're saying. And don't forget to blink. Sometimes I get really caught up and I'm staring at the camera and my eyes start getting really dry. And so, yeah, just make sure that you are acting as naturally as you possibly can during your presentation. That will really help. So on the other hand, you don't need to feel the need to be totally perfect in what you say. If you make a mistake or say something wrong or stutter a little bit or can't quite get your thought, don't feel like that's the end of the world. It's really natural and it's going to happen. And if you don't make a big deal about it, then nobody else is really going to pay much attention to it. The other thing that I don't have on the slide, but I wanted to point out, is that nobody knows what you're planning to say. So if you forget something, don't worry about it, because nobody else knows. You're the one who knows everything you wanted to say, and hopefully it all makes sense in the end. But if you forgot to say one particular element of your slides, don't worry about it. Just move on, because nobody else knows what you're planning to say. Practice as much as you can at looking at the camera. That's going to be really helpful in making you seem really personable to your audience. And then in dress, you want to make sure, at least on the top, that you're dressed very professionally. Typically dark clothes are better, just to be able to pick up, and especially to contrast with your environment or with your backdrop if you're using one. All right, so we talked about some of the things about setting the stage, just making sure that you're paying attention to the elements of your webcam, the elements of your audio, which screen is going to display your presentation. So if you have multiple screens, you want to practice making sure that you know where the screens are going to project on which screen. And if you're going to be sharing multiple things, you want to be able to make sure that when you start the presentation, you're sharing the screen as opposed to the application. So if you say, I just want to share my PowerPoint, and then you jump over to a Word document, no one in the audience is going to be able to see the Word document. You're going to get 6 minutes into presenting about it, and people are going to be lost and wonder why is what they're talking about not matching with what I'm seeing. And so just practice that to make sure ahead of time that everything is able to be displayed. If you are having multiple presenters, then do a practice run ahead of time to make sure that you both know who's going to be doing which slides, how we're going to interact, whether we're going to feel comfortable interrupting each other or adding comments, because of the mode of being online is a little bit different from when you can kind of just read each other in a face-to-face environment. Really important to test your connection and your bandwidth at the time of day that you plan to do your presentation. So if you're doing your presentation when your kids are down in the basement playing their game, and your daughter is in the room watching Netflix, and if everybody is using the technology at the same time, you want to make sure that your presentation is going to be able to be running smoothly at the same time of day. So check that out. And then don't rely solely on your presentation. If something happens in the middle of your presentation and all of a sudden your screen share quits working, or your presentation slides aren't working or something, you need to be able to still shift and be able to continue your presentation, because there won't be another chance for you to do that. So test and test and test and test and test, but also recognize that all the testing in the world doesn't mean that unforeseen things won't happen. All right, so a couple of things on setting up your camera and your background. So if you are looking at the bottom of your Zoom client, you'll see that option where it says to start your video. And there's a little arrow right next to it. So if you click on that little arrow, it will pop up with an option for you to select a virtual background. And if you look, there's the one that's labeled 1 that doesn't have an option for a video filter. And there's another version that is the one that has the video filter option. If you have the one on the left, that means that your Zoom has not been updated. Your Zoom application has not been updated. So if you want to be able to use some of the features, including breakout rooms, self-selection, and things like that, you need to make sure you have the latest version of Zoom. So I would encourage you to update your Zoom prior to your presentation that you're going to do. If you click on the option to choose a background, then it will let you select an image to use. So like the image I have behind me, I can also switch to show different images. And in a lot of cases, that is really helpful to remove some of the distractions that are behind you. Now, be really careful, because if you're in an environment that doesn't have a good place for you to have a background, then you may actually look like a ghost and kind of fade in and out of your background. So that could be even more distracting for your audience than for them to just see your busy background. So do some testing and play around with the kinds of images on your background that will look best for what you're planning to wear or do that day. So if you're going to have your hair up or your hair down, or you're going to have something that you're demonstrating, you may not want to use a background because it could fade. Like if I'm using my cup here, it actually fades in and out as it gets in different places of the camera. So just play around with that and make sure that that's going to work well for you. Zoom also has options for different kinds of filters in which you can put little hats on yourself for little ears and nose. If you're doing a fun gamified session, that might be a great way for you to play around and engage your audience, encourage them to turn on their cameras and pick a mustache that works with them. And so that might be a way for you to play around a little bit and have some fun. So in terms of you being present during your presentation, it's really important that you do a lot of the things that we've talked about. If you want to eliminate your camera view, there's actually an option for you to turn off the self view. And that might be a way for you to be able to pay more attention to the other people that are on the screen, as opposed to watching yourself and being horrified by something that's, you know, your hair is sticking up funny or whatever. So just play around with those options as well. You can also, many of you have probably noticed in Zoom meetings where you'll have lots and lots of little black squares with people's names on them and nothing else. And it's really hard to look at a screen of just lots of names. So you can hide the non-video participants, and that will be an option for you to be able to just look at the people who have their cameras on. On the other hand, if you have no one who will turn on your cameras, that can also be really disconcerting to be presenting at a blank screen. So animating, using different tones of voice, using your hands, those are all things that you would naturally do in the face-to-face environment. You should feel comfortable in doing those, but also recognize what that might do to your camera view. So just practice it. And then making sure that you're talking to and with the participants in your session, as opposed to just talking at them and not paying any attention to the things that they say. Because just as Sherry said, people want to feel that they can have their voice heard in some fashion. They want to be able to participate, and they want to feel like they're gaining something of value by actually being there, as opposed to watching the recording. So some ways that you can involve your participants: ask them questions like Sherry was showing, have people put things in the chat, have people comment on the things that they're thinking in terms of what you're presenting about. If you have the opportunity, use people's names. So they have the opportunity to have their camera, even if they have their camera off, they still have the opportunity to have their name. And so if somebody raises their hand or wants to participate, calling on them is a really great way, using their name to help them feel like they're seen. Using polling, whether it's polling in Zoom or polling some other way, and having collaborative notes where everybody is able to help participate. All those are good ways to help people be involved. And we'll talk through a couple more of those in a minute. If you're using props, just think about how they are going to display and make sure that they will be visible to your participants as they're going. And as I mentioned already, using your tone, smiling, looking at the camera, all of those things that you would naturally do if you were in person are going to be really important in a virtual presentation. One quick note just to mention is that if you are going to use Zoom breakouts or polls and you need those set up ahead of time, you will need to have those set up ahead of time. So just contact us through the email, replying to the email that Katie's going to send out, making sure that you notify exactly which session you're presenting and what questions you need and how many breakout rooms you'll need. All right, so this slide, I'm just going to kind of talk through some of the examples. So we already talked about some of them, but I want to dig into them just a little bit more in terms of details. With polling, you can use pretty much any polling mechanism that you would like to use. If you do it in Zoom, you will need to let us know ahead of time just so that we can have it prepared for you. But if it's not in Zoom, if you have Poll Everywhere built into your PowerPoint slides or Google Slides, if you're using a tool like Mentimeter or some of the other polling tools, you can certainly run those. If they run through your PowerPoint or through your Google Slides or through your Keynote slides, you'll have complete control of those slides, so you can run those polls as you go. Of course, you can use the chat in Zoom, just like we've been using today. If you have another tool that you want to use for chat and it's not going to distract from what you're using for your presentation, like Prelude is a tool that is a chat tool. So if it's something like that, you can just provide a link, or I'll show you in just a little bit how you can use a QR code to connect your users to anything that you're sending them out to do in terms of services that you want to use. But chat's a good way, really simple. Most everybody knows how to use it and not too confusing. And you'll have somebody in the session who can help to kind of monitor and call attention to things if you need to jump in on them. We encourage you already to use Twitter hashtags. There is one for OLC Accelerate, and then you can go into your session settings as well, and you can create custom hashtags for your session in addition to that. Collaborative notes and shared deliverables. Google is one example. Padlet is another one that's really great. There's a number of other different options that you can use for letting people take notes or to share their ideas. If you have an idea for a tool that you've loved using for collaborative notes or for shared deliverables, drop them in the chat. That'd be a great way for us to share out. I saw somebody had posted about Wakelet earlier. Somebody else had posted about Padlet. But share those kinds of tools that you're using, because those might be really helpful to people who would like to get some ideas. In terms of the audio and video report out and Q&A, we're going to do that at the end of this session, but that's a really good way for you if you're staying on time with your presentation and you'd like to be able to get some interaction from people. You can allow people to turn on their video or just their audio if they want to. But just be careful about how much time you end up taking with that component of your presentation, because you still want to be able to cover everything that you have in terms of your objectives for your session. And you don't want it to kind of get into this long drawn out discussion where one are kind of taking over the presentation. Competitions and games, a couple of ideas for that. If you've seen Kahoot before, it's browser-based. You can run it with some options for people to be able to play along and answer questions. Those are kind of fun. Quizzes is another tool that a lot of people use for those kinds of gamings. So those will be great ways. There are other ways you can do it as well, but those are a couple of options. Mentimeter also has some options for that kind of a gaming tool for you to do. In terms of follow-up, so Sherry had mentioned that some of the sessions will really encourage you to be really short and compact and concise in what you say, and you want to give people an opportunity to follow up afterwards. You can use a Google form or a survey, but you might also send them to a link to be able to learn more about what you're talking about, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. All right, so one thing we wanted to cover was making sure that your presentation is visually accessible. So making sure that you're using good colors to be on the screen, making sure there's enough contrast that people can see what you're presenting, making sure that you're following those accessibility effective practices, and recognizing that you're not going to have a big, large projection screen to be able to put your presentation slides on. So you're going to have to make sure that it looks good in Zoom and it's able to be viewed on a single screen. Making sure that your slides are clean, that they're uncluttered, that you're not using a whole lot of text. Maybe you're using good bullet points or pictures and kind of talking through. Another thing you want to make sure is that your presentation is shareable. So if you're giving them a link to a Google Slides or a PDF, that you have made sure that that is shareable, that they will have access to it, so you don't get 25 requests for shared permissions as soon as you send out the link. And you can check that just by opening an incognito window in your browser and putting the link in there. And if it works for you, then as you're not logged in, then it should be also accessible to other people. But if you don't know for sure, you can also email it to a friend and say, hey, try to open this and see what it looks like. You also want to make sure that if you're using other materials, that you have a way that you'll be able to share those out. I'll show you the QR code option in just a little bit. That could be a really useful tool for that. But you can also perhaps put everything into a single PDF that has your slides and your documents as well. All right, in terms of your presentation itself, making sure that it is engaging, that you're representing your style and who you are, and that you're deciding whether you want to use bullet points or images, or if you want to use video or audio, all of those kinds of things. Just want to make sure that they're accessible to other people. Test it out in a practice session with a friend, test it out on your screen, make sure everything, you can even go into your own Zoom and practice doing a session in which you record and no one's there. You're just recording the session and figuring out how everything works. All right, I think, Katie, is this where I turn it over to you?
Sure. I think there have been a lot of questions in the chat, and I would like to just address that each presentation room will have both an OLC staff person as the manager in the room. They will be in the role of host, and as a presenter, when you enter your room, which you'll enter just as a regular attendee, that OLC room manager will give you the co-host role, in large part to just, you know, make your name at the top of the list and recognize you as the presenter or presenters. There will also be a volunteer session chair in each room. So that individual is a volunteer from the community of conference participants, and many of you may have received an email to solicit if you'd like to serve in this capacity. But they'll be there to help you to manage your Q&A, give you a 5-minute warning or keep on time, things like that. So there will be people in each Zoom room presentation that will be there to assist you. They will also help manage polls and breakout sessions. They will also introduce you. So there will be just, you know, a minute or two in the beginning of each session for housekeeping, and then 30 seconds at the end for wrap-up housekeeping. So when you are planning your 45 minutes or however long your individual session is, most sessions are 45 minutes, and this doesn't necessarily apply to the lightning talk just because you have that short 15-minute time frame, but do plan on a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning and a tiny bit of housekeeping to wrap up at the end. So, but we will have staff to help and volunteers to help.
Katie, there was a question in the chat about whether there's a participant limit for the rooms.
As of right now, we just have a 300-person participant limit on each of our Zoom licenses. We found that with OLC Innovate that we never exceeded that 300-person limit. So everything will be recorded. So for those folks who don't make it in, you know, if it happens to be an issue, if anybody happens to go over 300, then the recordings will be posted later for on-demand viewing.
And then just another point of clarification was that as the presenter in my session, I will not be a co-host of the session. So I will not be able to start breakouts or start polls. Is that correct?
You will be a co-host, but not a host.
Okay.
It will be up to the OLC Zoom room manager, who will be in the host role, to assist with the breakout assignments and the poll launching.
Okay, thank you.
I've been trying to answer the questions as I've been seeing them in the chat, but let's go through some of these logistical items in the slides and then answer additional questions that we might not address over the slides, okay? So just as a reminder, your session chair is a volunteer. They will help moderate your chat. They'll help you with a timing reminder. And again, bookend with those announcements and reminders. So that is what your session chair is there to do. As the slide says, they're not there to bring you your lunch or answer your specific presentation questions. They will say, you know, oh, you have a question in the chat from so-and-so about, and then pose the question to you. So that is the role of these volunteer session chairs. And if you're interested in volunteering, like I said, Christine sent out an email at the end of last week. Feel free to fill out the form to indicate your interest in volunteering in that role. All right, next slide, please. I think, Tanya, this was your slide. But
Yes,
just a reminder, you've got this.
So I just wanted to encourage all of you to come and try out our coaching sessions if you're interested in that. But if you don't have time to do the coaching sessions with us, or you feel a little bit unsure about doing it with us, definitely reach out to your friends, reach out to your colleagues, and do some practice. But you know, you're going to do fine. Even if you hesitate or misstep or have a slide that doesn't work the way you want it to, don't worry about it. We are all very excited that you're going to be presenting, that you're going to be sharing your expertise and your knowledge, and hopefully you're engaging your audience in ways that can help them to feel that they're really a part of the session. And we just want to let you know that we have confidence in you and that you are going to be able to do this.
All right, thanks, Tanya. Now we can get into the nitty-gritty of some of these logistical questions. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. All right, and I know that Tanya has already talked about this, but please make sure you prepare and test your technology ahead of time. It's really important to have a good quality mic, headset for good audio quality, a webcam, and a stable internet connection. Those are kind of the basic technologies that you want to make sure that you have. We've talked about it a lot already, but the upload deadline for your presentation materials is November 2nd. I will be sending an email out most likely early next week that includes directions for this. We'll talk about it a little in a couple of slides, and there is a short instructional video on that presenter services page that we've linked to so often in the chat. But please do be aware that that deadline is November 2nd. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't upload a new version, and we have systems in place that will actually check the date stamps. And if there's a date stamp that is more recent, it'll grab it and upload it into our second system as well. We will have two conference venues, our classic platform and our beta platform. And so we want to make sure that everybody's materials are located in both platforms, so regardless of which platform the attendees use to access the conference materials and join links, they will still have access to your materials on both platforms. And that's why that deadline of November 2nd is so important. Also, just a note, we did the all virtual conference for OLC Innovate earlier in the summer in June, and it's so important for all presenters to upload their materials to the conference management system. It is an enormous accessibility accommodation for people. And also, people just like to have access to that information. So we just saw tons and tons of requests, more so than usual at a face-to-face conference, to ask people to make sure that they've shared their materials. Also, just a quick note, all the times listed in the program, if you don't know what time you're scheduled to present, I do encourage you to check the program page, and I'm going to throw that link into the chat also. But all times are listed in Eastern, US Eastern. So keep that in mind, and if you are located in another time zone, please make the conversion so that you don't miss your presentation. We did have that happen a couple of times at Innovate, so we would not want that to happen to you. All right, the next slide, please, Tanya. Okay, so as I mentioned in the chat, we encourage you to arrive early, 10 to 15 minutes before your scheduled presentation time. This gives you time to meet your OLC Zoom room manager and your volunteer session chair. It gives you time to test your mic, test your screen share, test your video, test your computer sound share if you'd like to share sound. It also gives you a chance to just touch base on any special requests for breakouts, polls, things like that. If you are planning on using the built-in polling functionality in Zoom, we will ask you to email us with your poll questions and the answer options ahead of time. Those requests will also be due November 2nd. So please do email us at that conference@onlinelearning-c.org email address with your requests for breakout sessions and polls. Again, please include all of your poll questions, your different answers that you'd like, and any other special considerations so that we can make a note of it. We keep a very extensive spreadsheet of all sessions that include notes for your staff room managers about polls, breakouts, and all the other information that your staff manager will need for each session. One thing about breakouts to note is that if you send everybody out to different breakouts, the breakout rooms are not recorded and they are not captioned. We strongly advise you to leave one group of participants in the main room so that everything in that room can be recorded and captioned for those who are watching your session on demand. You can also use Google Docs for collaborative work in lieu of breakouts, but we also encourage you to be creative in how you plan to have your attendees engage in your session. All right, next slide, please, Tanya. All right, so again, all the sessions will be recorded automatically. Your session chair will introduce you, give you a 5-minute remaining alert, and you can go over this with them in that 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time. If you'd rather have a 10-minute alert, or if you want them to give you a little wave or interrupt you, you guys can get together during that 10 to 15 minutes to make sure that you're on the same page and your session chair can best support you. All right, and then please, feel free to share a tiny URL or a QR code or something like that for people to access your slides easily. Again, we do strongly encourage you to upload them to the conference management system so that everyone can access them. And then the next slide, I'm actually going to turn things back to Tanya because she is going to help explain how you might go about creating a QR code.
Thanks, Katie. Yep, so this is pretty simple. You can create a QR code by using any of the QR code generators, but here's one that I've given you that is an example. You'll just copy the URL of anywhere that you want to be able to use and put that URL into the QR code generator. It will give you an option to then download the code, and it'll give you a little picture that's this little square here. And then you can paste that image onto any of your slides, and you can put other things around it. This particular QR code is going to send you to my LinkedIn profile and give you an opportunity to connect with me on LinkedIn. So that would be a good way for you to give your contact information in your slides, because people can use any camera, any smartphone camera. They hold their camera up over the QR code. It's going to capture that and open a URL for them. So if you have documents or a shared Google Doc that you want them to do, or a survey, this would be a good way to put that directly on the screen for them to be able to get that link very quickly.
Thank you, Tanya. All right. So, and just a reminder, the presenter services webpage has a lot of the resources that we've talked about today, and it also will have the recording to this session and the slides from this session. So you can go there. Tomorrow morning, I'll have that stuff posted, if not later this afternoon. So, but it is a great reference for you. You can find the OLC slide template for download there. If you would prefer to use an OLC slide template, it's there for your use. You'll find the session evaluation slide there, but you actually really don't need to worry about that too much, because the kind of wrapper slides that the staff room manager will include that as with a reminder as well. It will have, if you want to request coaching, you'll be able to do that there, and then all the webinar recordings and things like that. It's a great resource. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and to follow up, we will email all of you with specific instructions for uploading your slides, requesting polls and breakouts, and also accessing your session. You will access it just like a normal conference attendee, as I mentioned earlier, and then the room manager will elevate you to that co-host role. All right, go ahead. Okay, so uploading your presentation. There is a video tutorial on that presenter services page, but just quickly, you'll log into your OLC user account. You'll select your conference profile from the left-hand menu of your user, your account profile. And then when you're in the conference management system, and this is where your proposals were submitted, you'll click on My Sessions in the upper right-hand corner, and then next to the session that you want to upload your files for, you'll click on the edit link. Then you'll be able to upload your file, add a link. So there's two different options. You can either upload files, and it accepts a variety of files, PowerPoint, PDF. I think those are the two most common file types, but it does accept others. And then there's also a field where you can enter a link, a URL, whether that's to a Prezi or a Google document. You can also upload supplemental files. So there are a lot of options there. And then always remember to click save. If you navigate away from the page before you click save, then it won't save your file uploads. And a reminder, again, the deadline is November 2nd for those uploads. All right, and then this is the evaluation slide that OLC staff will have in our wrapper slides. We want to encourage everyone who attends your sessions to provide you with feedback, so that you can then look at your feedback later. We'll email you when that's ready, but it does kind of happen in real time, and that feedback is available in the conference management system as well. So, all right, I think that is all that we had for presentation material. I know that there were some questions in the chat, and I'm not sure if there were any that we were not able to address. I'm happy to stay on and address any remaining questions for a few minutes.
I tried to grab as many of them as I could, but if I did not grab anybody's, then you're welcome to pop it into the chat again, and we'll try to answer it.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. And also just a huge thank you to everyone who took time out to attend the webinar this afternoon. We really look forward to your presentations and your participation in the conference in a month.
Thank you guys so much. What a great turnout.
Christine has a question about accessing the presenter site. Are you talking about the conference management system where you would upload your files? Okay, so the easiest way to access that is to log into your OLC user account, and then on your account profile page, there's a menu on the left-hand side. On that menu, there's a link that says conference profile. That's the easiest way to get redirected to your conference management profile. Valerie asks, how will conference participants be accessing the presentations? As I briefly touched upon earlier, we will have 2 conference venues. One will be our classic venue, which is through our main OLC Accelerate microsite. The other one is a beta venue that we're testing out for our virtual conferences this year. Each attendee will have the option of which platform to use to access the session information and the links to join the sessions. How should we handle what would be the interactive portion, poll everywhere for the uploaded files, census items will be active yet or post? So Rachel, there are a couple of different ways you could handle that. And Tanya and Sherry may have some additional suggestions for this, but one would be to replace that slide in your uploaded files with something else. And I see Sherry nodding. And another option too would be to upload a version of your slides after the fact that has the results of your polls. Tanya or Sherry, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend, is that you have a placeholder slide for where you're going to do the poll. And then afterwards, if you want to be able to share the results, just put a screen capture of the results into the slides and upload a new version of the presentation after the session's over.
Great, thank you, Tanya, for that addition. All right, Christine, if you want to email me at conference we can make sure that we can get you to your profile. I don't want to screen share your personal profile information or anything like that, but I do want to make sure that you're able to access. So let's see, how do I add poll questions prior on Zoom if I want to conduct polls using Zoom? So we request that if you plan on using polls in the Zoom poll feature, that you send us an email to conference@onlinelearning-c.org with your poll questions and answers, and we will set those up ahead of time for you. Matthew asks if they can submit preliminary slides on the 2nd and update. Yes, you can certainly do that. And again, our system, we have something set up so that our DevOps team watches the timestamps, so they know which presentation files have been updated. So Mary is asking about trying out the venues in advance. So we're still setting all the venues up, but as soon as they are ready, then we will email everyone with access information. Diane's asking how we present our slides from our computer. When you're in a Zoom room, there's a screen share button on the bottom. So when you select the screen share button, you'll be able to select which window you'd like to share. And I do recommend that you practice that if you're not familiar with it. You can sign up for a Zoom account for free and practice and test out screen sharing and all of the other features. Rachel's asking how many people are registered for OLC Accelerate thus far. We have over 1,000 people registered already, and we expect that number to continue climbing. We're anticipating close to about 3,000 registrants. Valerie asks if I should upload a different version of my slides if I don't want my participants to see the activities in my 2-hour interactive workshop. So that is certainly something you could do. You could certainly have 2 different versions, one version for uploading and one version for presenting. What I would recommend, if that's what you'd like to do, is afterward upload your completed version so that folks who are watching your on-demand recording have access to that information. Okay, Christine looks like she found it. Great. If you have any trouble accessing your account, if you need a password reset, feel free to reach out to us and we will assist and resolve any login issues that you might have. Diane asked if we will know in advance how many have registered for our sessions. So outside of the pre-conference workshops that happen on Friday, November 6th, we don't require anyone to register ahead of time for sessions they want to attend. That means that you won't know how many people will be in your session. You could have anywhere from 30 to 150. So it is a conference where we encourage people to attend the events, the sessions that they wish to attend. And you may see that some people might float out of your session and into another one. And that's just the nature of the conference. All right, I hope I got everybody's questions. If I did not, feel free to grab the mic and remind me of your question. Diane, the conference is peer reviewed. Our proposals all go through it's a rigorous 3-phased review process. The exceptions to that would be things, the industry showcases, which are sponsor presentations and are marked clearly as industry showcases. You know, things like evening activities, speed networking, those are not peer reviewed, but all of the academic presentations do go through a very rigorous 3-stage review process. All right, any other questions or anything that I missed? Again, feel free to grab the mic if if I missed your question in the chat. Yep, go ahead, Diane, with your question about polling. Oh, Diane, we can't hear you. Can you, if you want to type it in the chat, I'd be happy to answer it for you. Sorry about that. Matthew, if we need to update our abstract, how do we do that? So please send your updated abstract to us at conference@onlinelearning-c.org. I'll put that in the chat again. onlinelearning-c.org. At this point in the process, in order to maintain the integrity of the review process and all of that, we need to make any changes on the admin side to presenters, abstracts, extended abstracts, stuff like that. You'll be able to upload your files, but any other changes would need to be submitted to us in writing at conference@onlinelearning-c.org. All right, Diane's asking about the polling. Can you explain the blank slide again as a placeholder? I'm going to actually let Tanya take that one.
Sure, absolutely. So you can either have just an empty slide, or you can have an empty slide that has your question itself and what you will use. Or if you're using a tool like Poll Everywhere, you can have the slide built into your slide deck that has the Poll Everywhere app already loaded onto it, and it will display just as you run your presentation. There is an option now in Poll Everywhere that will allow you to pick a series of slides to go into your deck. So it will have one that previews, one that actually is the slide, and then one that actually automatically adds in the screenshot with your results. So if you're using Poll Everywhere, you might play around with that.
I know we've gone way over our initial 45 minutes to an hour time frame. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and have that start rendering. But again, I'm happy to stay and hang out for another couple of minutes if people continue to have questions. You know, and just a huge thank you to everyone. And we are so looking forward to this conference and your contributions to it.
Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.